Well, welcome. As everybody was just informed, my name is Matt Rose. I love coming right after a break, so everybody grab your coffee. I have a little bit of a different style. It's more conversation than presentational, but really what we're going to talk about today is really defining a movement in the software development industry, which is DevOps, and how does security play with that? Just by introduction, this is me, just so I have a little bit of street cred. This is my third speaking engagement of the week. I was in Texas already this week, but I am local. How many people know where Millis, Massachusetts is? Graduated from Millis High School in '93, went to UMass Dartmouth, just down the road. But 9 years ago, I decided that it was too cold here, and I now live in Charlotte, North Carolina. So if anybody wants to get out of the cold, it's a great place. But my dad actually still lives 25 minutes away in Franklin. So this is, I haven't been here in a while, but this is an interesting spot of years past. So as we go through this process, I get these buttons right, really we're going to talk about DevOps. How many people know what DevOps is? How many people have DevOps initiatives? Few people? Well, really, in the previous presentation, it was like, you don't have to do things now. You know, you can wait. DevOps is the technology industry's really shift to support the instant on, the always on concept of your applications, your software, your websites, so on and so forth. So really what DevOps is really about is processes, connections, automation, and the tooling around it. These three bubbles kind of intersect. But that's great. That's about building software. It's really modernizing the Henry Ford assembly line for software. No longer do you have like small, like long drawn out blocks to develop software and testing, and things get released every 3 months or 6 months or 9 months or every 12 months. Some of the largest organizations in the world have hundreds, if not thousands, of releases of their platform a day. And there's a lot of different technical aspects associated with that behind the curtain. But a lot of the things you're using on a day-to-day basis are being updated hundreds, if not thousands of times a day. Well, that introduces a new problem for organizations and for individuals. How do you secure that? How do you secure a piece of software or an application that is being updated so much or so often? So thinking about that, how do you insert security technologies, and what are the security technologies that you should actually think about when you're introducing a DevOps program? Just another quick question from the audience. DevOps or DevSecOps? How many people prefer DevOps? No hands? How many prefer DevSecOps? It's an interesting conversation. I talk to a lot of very high-level CISOs or some of the largest organizations around the world, and DevSecOps is kind of becoming a little bit disliked because DevOps should include security. It doesn't mean it does, but a lot of times they're just they're pretty persistent in saying that security should be part of DevOps, and when you call it out, it's kind of defeating the whole purpose of the integration automation aspects of a DevOps or DevSecOps program. So one of the things I like to just start with, I'm going to go over this quickly because usually this presentation, it's really an hour and a half, so we have 30-something minutes, so I'm going to try and go through it in a little quicker. When you think about security technologies, there's acronym soup out there. We're in a state of security technologies starting to double up, or acronyms starting to double up in their meaning. So I gave a presentation at a major DevOps show and I started to mention the security technology acronyms, and I started to get a lot of blank stares. So this is kind of level setting the security technologies you should think about when you're implementing automation of security scanning, security identification within your DevOps program. So starting at the top, how many people have heard of static analysis? Scanning of the source code? Okay, the secondary one is really, this is a modernization and more of a legacy technology. The more legacy is more dynamic application security testing because it's slower and takes a long time. The industry's response, or the technical landscape's response to that, is a new technology called interactive application security testing that leverages your existing processes associated with functional testing for finding security risk. The other two technologies, that one is more legacy, one is more modern, is a web application firewall, device that sits on the wire, makes assumptions about the traffic it sees, either reports it or blocks it, or something that's baked into the application itself in a production environment, which is runtime application security protection. And then the last piece on this list is something that I hope most of you are thinking about in terms of policies and implementation, is open source analysis, or as it's more familiar called today, software composition analysis, which is SCA. And there's the double acronym that I was worried about. Source code analysis is sometimes called SCA. Software composition analysis is also called SCA. So when you're having these conversations as a security professional with your DevOps architects or with your development environment, always try and define the acronym because they mean vastly different things in some cases. So that's great. We have these technologies, we have DevOps. Where do they fit? So the DevOps building blocks are really development, CI, CD, and production. These are the building blocks. They each have different responsibilities, different tooling, different actions associated with what they do. Where does security slot itself? When you're actually architecting a DevSecOps program, where do you integrate and automate security? So as you think about the technologies themselves, static analysis happens in the development arena. Scanning of the source code in a developer's native environment. In the CI arena, that's where you automate the process of scanning code, either with full scans, or more importantly, to keep up with the speed of DevOps, incremental scanning. This is where you can also automate software composition analysis to help scan your open source packages that are part of your program. As you move into the CD arena, that's where the legacy technology of dynamic application security testing takes place, or the more modern technology of interactive application security takes place, in addition to manual pen tests or manual testing of your applications themselves. As you move into the production, the last two pieces that were on the list, or they were kind of maybe in the middle, where you have a web application firewall, a device on the wire, or more of a modern insertion of security protections into an app in production of a runtime application security protection. So that's all well and good. We see the slotting of the security technologies. But from a practical standpoint, how does this all work together? How many people have heard someone say, we're Agile DevOps, or we're very agile in our development process? I like to sit back and kind of do a little deeper dive on that, because what do you mean by Agile? And I said, do you mean Agile verb or Agile noun? And I get very strange looks. So from an Agile noun standpoint, Agile is a software development methodology, like waterfall, like Kanban, like so many other different types of technologies, which slots itself as part of the development discipline within DevOps. So if someone says, we're Agile DevOps, that's like saying you're engine car. You're a component of a greater thing. So think about what they're meaning by Agile. Is it the methodology they're using, or are they just saying they're very flexible, which is Agile verb? We're responsive to change. We're responsive to our product management's change requests. We're responsible to our customers' needs, our partners' needs. So you really want to understand what they mean by Agile, because as you implement security technologies, you need to know what you're talking about. So in an Agile-based software development methodology, there's different ways in best practice for implementing security technologies than other types of disciplines. So always try and get the definition of what someone means by Agile when you're having that conversation. So I'm going to show you a slide in a second, but continuous integration is the fuel for your DevOps program. It is the conductor of the orchestra. You hear CI, or continuous integration orchestration, or CI pipelines, those type of terms. It is what puts the pieces of the puzzle, the 10,000 piece jigsaw puzzle, which is your software, your code, dependencies, your open source packages, and puts it all together. And really what CI is about the correct tooling and really the creation of the software itself. And I feel this is the best place for security technologies to be automated, integrated. How many people follow Gartner or read the Gartner Magic Quadrant for application security testing? Few hands. I met with the lead analyst at the Gartner conference, it was a couple months ago now, and he says the biggest request for information that Gartner is getting these days is around automation of security technologies. What are best practices? How do I make it work with my DevOps program that's constantly evolving? So it's not just about the technologies, it's about the utilization of the technology itself. And they also said the second piece that they're getting a lot of requests for is on interactive application security testing and how that would complement their DevOps process. But really CI is as simple as implementing the correct tooling in an integrated, the hooks, and then the automation, turning on the hooks. The second definition, and this is a common question you can understand too, or ask, is CD. There's really two definitions for CD, but it's used interchangeably. CD is, people say CD and they just assume it means the same thing. So is it continuous delivery or continuous deployment? Continuous delivery is an automated process and basically a configuration that continues through the whole process up until release, and then that's a manual step. The pie in the sky, or the nirvana for a automated DevOps program, is continuous deployment, where every time something's checked in, it runs all the way through the process, including functional testing, and is deployed to production. That's more, again, the nirvana, and I'm getting from, a very unofficial process or a query of, audiences like this, only like 3 to 5% are fully at continuous deployment at this point. They want to get there, but there are certain barriers, and the technology needs to, for that continuous automation needs to support many different use cases, and it's just not there yet. So, how many people use the term shift left? Shift left with your development. You read reports saying, oh, it's much cheaper to fix security vulnerabilities in development than test, than production. The left side is the beginning. But my question is, software development life cycles have always been depicted as a linear process. A sentence. I went to the store. Capital I, period at the end of store. Software is a living, breathing thing. It's never fully baked, especially in a DevOps arena. If you're doing hundreds, if not thousands of builds a day and releases, that piece is never done. Someone says, that's already in production. I'm not going to worry about that. Well, the next train is leaving the station right behind it. So you need to automate throughout the whole process. You have to automate from the left in the development arena, which I think as a best practice is the best place for remediation of issues based on the findings of a CI automation of scanning your software, your running applications, and then circling the loop back. And then as you move to the right, that's where ISSA and dynamic testing take place, and then in the production, that's where web application firewalls or the more modern technology of a RAS solution, runtime application security protection. So think about that. There's not a silver bullet for application security scanning that is going to be everything to everybody. You need to have different types of technologies inserted at the appropriate inflection point within your DevOps program. It's very helpful, and the last thing you want to do is create contention. So to kind of back up my previous statement, this is a modern software development lifecycle or a DevOps process. It's a lot more than just the development, I check it in, I build it, it's done. And to kind of back up the question of shift left, where is left on this infinity loop? Is there a left? Is there a right? No, it's the process. And that's why I say software is a living, breathing organism that is constantly evolving and changing. Because as soon as the first process starts, so the insertion point is really at the build phase, which is controlled by continuous integration, and that fuels the rest of the DevOps program. So I'm just going to leave this up there for a second, because this is really key to thinking about your program. You can't have an inflection point. Security technology has to complement DevOps, not security technologies change DevOps to account for security. You cannot be out of band. You can't have additional requirements for security testing. You just need to be part of the process and almost transparent to the process, just like the build platform, the dependency repository, the open source repository, so on and so forth. And even the functional testing if you want to go to the more right side of the development process. So this is all well and good. We've automated. We're doing open source or software composition analysis, we're doing static analysis, and we find a security issue. Let's break the build. Let's stop this train. I'm the security professional. I'm going to stop the release because there's risk. Well, I'm going to, break the news to you. There's always risk in your software. There's no such thing as a completely clean piece of software or application. It's whether you're accepting the risk or you have a plan for remediation. So a lot of times I'll talk to security architects and they'll say, I want to break the build for every issue. I'm like, you're never going to have a release. You can't be the boy who cried wolf in terms of security. Your security policy has to be very tight in its execution to not be too noisy to create contention from the development staff, the program managers, so on and so forth. And just to add a little humor, there's a lot of humor around breaking the build. How many software engineers do we have in the room? Many? A few? What's, you know, from somebody that raised, I mean, I was a software engineer for many years. If you broke the build, the world ended for you. You were not allowed to go to lunch, home, or anything. So just some memes, and I apologize, there's some colorful words in here, but just for humor for everybody. Breaking the build is a very big deal in a software development organization. So the last thing you want to do is be too noisy or too alarmist in breaking the build around security. So what drives the identification? Your DevSecOps program is only good as the security policy it's enforcing. You could have a Ferrari in terms of the security technologies, but if you put in, you know, 10-year-old gas from your lawnmower in your Ferrari, it's not going to work very well. Same thing with your static analysis, your open source analysis. You have to configure it to be very concise and very effective in things that are important to you. I find the magic number as you start a program in terms of a security policy is 5 to 10 really egregious things that you look to baseline, remediate, and then turn the dials up over time. The secondary thing is you don't want to let that policy sit for too long. Interesting story, I was talking to a major organization and I said, what is your security policy? They're like, oh, we have a fantastic security policy. You know, it's based on OWASP, but we have this lead security architect that's fantastic, and he's the one that authored the security policy, and we use that for our entire program. And I asked, well, when was the last time it was updated? Well, he actually left the company 3 years ago, but he did a really great policy, we've just stuck with it. The policy has to, with the speed of DevOps, your security policies have to be updated at the speed of DevOps as well. There's new open source vulnerabilities, there's new frameworks, there's new versions of a language. So your policy, and I highly suggest that you go through at least an exercise to at least review your policy on a quarterly basis. Because just like new software introducing risk, a dated security policy can introduce the same type of risk. If you're not looking for new or evolving type of threats in your code or your running application, then you're going to fall behind the curve. Also, you need to have a process that looks at different flavors of your software, because not every piece of software is created equal. You have your bleeding edge applications that process customer data, financial data, PII data. Then you have your back office systems. Those may have a different risk. You have your open source packages. All of these have to be kind of quantified into where am I going to spend my time and resources? Because there's only so much time in a day, and you only have so many resources to remediate security issues. You want them to remediate the correct issues and the most egregious issues, because a lot of times there's just too many things to fix today, and you need to have a process to prioritize. I always say that when you look at security risk or the vulnerabilities themselves, there's two variables you have to take into account: impact and likelihood. The impact is really bad if this is exercised. If a hacker gets a hold of this vulnerability, it's disastrous. But it has a 0.0000001% chance of ever being executed. The sun, the stars, and the moons have to align. So you have to decide whether that is going to take precedence over something that has a bad impact but is much easier to potentially execute. So you always have to weigh impact and likelihood when you're looking at remediation based on limited time and resources. Because a lot of times your security team is very small and your development population is very large, even if it's outsourced. It's not a one-to-one match, so you have to be effective and efficient based on automation and communication of what needs remediation. So where does security and DevOps clash? And we saw this in the previous slide with the technologies. Full code scans take too long. In a legacy software development lifecycle that was using waterfall, you had clear blocks of time to do testing. It may, for the dynamic test, it may take you 3 days to crawl an application with a dynamic test. That doesn't work if you're doing 100 builds a day. Taking additional steps to require for security. Oh, this is a release that has to have security testing. We have to go through additional setup and configurations and identifications and bend over backwards to make it work. It just needs to be part of the process and not, outside of the process or out of band to the process. Stability is also key for a security program or a DevSecOps program. You can't be too noisy. It would be a perfect world if you could break every build on security risk, but that's not practical. I'm just being realistic. There is overhead, but you don't want to be the boy who cried wolf. You don't want to be overly noisy and stop the process, because then you're going to lose credibility. You have to be part of the process and communicate it in a way that's palatable based on the time to market, the available resources, and just the knowledge for remediation itself. So in summary, and then I'll open up for any questions. I think we have a little bit of time for questions, because I'd like to get your feedback. Again, you don't have to agree with me. I have my opinions, but I know everybody has their opinions as well on the subject, so you can disagree with me. I don't bite. I've had all my shots, so if you want to have a different kind of take on something, that's totally fine with me. And a lot of times I feel it's very important that when you come to an event like this, you learn from your peers, not just the speakers. But in summary, for the deck, or the prepared material, if you will, develop security policies that fit DevOps, not the other way around. The policies have to complement how aggressive your DevOps release cycle is, or your CI orchestration. Shift security left and right. Just putting a security technology at one point in your DevOps program is not effective, because there's certain types of vulnerabilities that can only be found with a static analysis solution. There's certain types of vulnerabilities that can only be found at runtime with IAST or DAST, or there's potential vulnerabilities in your open source packages that may fall outside the scope of both of those arenas. So your security is only as effective as the investigation points you have within the automated process. And if you're not doing something for your open source packages right now, even if you're a COTS-based organization and you're buying software that is including open source packages, make sure you know what's in there and what open source packages are being used. Because most of the breaches that you're hearing about today in the press, from Equifax on down, has an open source component associated with it. So if you're not addressing the open source risk, you're missing a big part of the equation. So I think I'm out of time. I'll check my clock. Yep, I have maybe one more question if anybody needs it. If not, I'll be in the back for a little bit. Again, Matt Rose with Checkmarx, and I appreciate your time and enjoy the rest of the sessions today. Thank you.